Good morning, everybody. Martina Nikialig is my name, and it's my pleasure to be your host this morning and to welcome you to the European Vocational Skills Week and to our workshop. I am very pleased that you are all here to share your thoughts and ideas with us on this very important topic of up and reskilling. Which upskilling opportunities for whom? And we would like to hear your reactions and your ideas about the strong points and the not so strong points of some of the approaches that have been taken in your countries. And you can also react to our speakers, who I will introduce in a while. But just to set the scene a bit, I mean, already in 2008, the World Economic Forum was telling us that 54% of the workforce would need upskilling in the next 5 years. And of course, 2 of those years have passed already. But we know that in Europe, we're training nothing like that number of people every year. And that is one of the reasons why the Commission has renewed its skills agenda in July. And this is also, of course, to support the new Commission's priorities and strategies to build a strong social Europe that supports just transitions. And of course, these transitions are the transition in the demographic picture in Europe, but also the transition to a green and more ecological Europe and jobs. And of course, the big digital transition, which is affecting all our lives and all our work. And then come March this year and the big bang, we're all locked down and we're experiencing a new thing that has never happened, at least in this part of the world, during our lives, and that's the pandemic and the virus that's affecting all of our lives at the moment. And this really pushed, I would say, the digital transition and showed us in real time what this means, actually, and everybody has had to react. So I think probably that has also changed people's attitude to upskilling and reskilling, because many people who were suddenly at home and having to come to terms with home office and come to terms with digital tools to do their work had to jump in almost without up or reskilling, or to do it certainly on the job. So this was also, of course, taken into consideration in the Commission's skills agenda. So it puts forward 12 actions, which are all about upskilling and reskilling the working population, really, but also offering skills for life and the changes that that are all around us. But just to mention a few of these actions, and I think you will see them reflected in the speakers' contributions. The first thing, of course, would be to have good skills intelligence and to try to comprehend what new skills people need in order to deal with the transitions. And then, of course, building a strong skills strategy and developing a culture of lifelong learning and providing specific skills, of course, digital skills and green skills that are going to help in those particular areas. But then, of course, we proposed a new blueprint for vocational education and training, and particularly there to have a strong continuing training element. And then the idea that maybe some workers will need just short courses and micro credentials, but that they will also need to be empowered to learn and to undertake training. So what financial mechanisms can be used? Perhaps an individual learning account, which we're exploring. And just developing people's basic skills and life skills. And of course, exploiting the European funds that are becoming available now in greater amounts than ever before, using those to develop our vet systems and continuing vocational training systems, and providing these upskilling opportunities for everybody. And we have set high objectives, not only for the workforce, but also for digital. But we would like to see by 2025, 120 million people from 25 to 64 in some sort of training every year, and to have at least 70% of all 16 to 74-year-olds with at least a basic level of digital competences. So with that in mind, then I would like to introduce to you our speakers this morning. We have contribution from Germany and from the Netherlands. And Michael Schulze is a member of the German National Skills Strategy Task Force at the Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. And of course, he's very familiar with issues around the future of work, having worked on the ministry's white paper on Work 4.0. And he also has small and medium-sized companies on his radar, because he was also involved in a project that was financed through ESF to support SMEs develop their HR strategies. And he holds a master's in public policy from the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. So welcome this morning, Michael. And we also have with us Daniel Benny-Yun from the Netherlands. And Daniel is a policy advisor also at the Dutch Ministry of Social Affairs and Employment in the Department of Labour Law and Diversity. And his work concentrates on the implementation of what they call in Dutch the STAP, or the Individual Learning and Development Budget, which is tailored to individuals' learning needs. And also he's involved in developing career advice for the people who need it most, and people who need skills development most. And he will tell us about that later. But he's also been working in the Dutch Employment Insurance Agency for 7 years. So lots of experience there to draw on in our discussion this morning from both our speakers. And welcome, Daniel. Before I pass you over to Michael, I would like to remind the audience that you can use Slido to interact both with the speakers, and we also have a question for you to be thinking about during the session, and that is: what essential elements does the system need to support reskilling and upskilling of the workforce? So what sort of ecosystem do we need, and what would be its characteristics? And those of you who are logged in, you will find on the right side of your screen access to the Slido tool. You can use it directly there. or you can connect via your phone with the Slido app. And for that, you need the event code hash K554. So that's a hashtag K554. And during the session, you can use two tabs, one for the poll question to give your ideas there, and the other to ask questions to our speakers. So without further ado, I would like to ask Michael to tell us about the Qualifications Act that has been introduced by his ministry in Germany. Thank you, Michael.
Good morning from my side, everybody, and thanks a lot for the invitation and the opportunity to present the German Skills Development Opportunities Act here today and to enter in a debate on the topic of continuous learning, adult learning in the face of the digital and ecological transitions, and which are in a way accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic we're all living through right now. And so while the individual systems and the challenges are a little different across countries, I think it's still very much valuable to learn from one another on the different initiatives. And around 3 weeks ago, I had the pleasure to learn a little about the individual learning budget in the Netherlands already. And that made me very curious to learn more about it today. And so I'm very glad about the opportunity to exchange with Daniel later on, but also with everybody who joined us today for the debate, and I'm very curious about that. And so for my brief input, I want to talk about three aspects basically. First, I'll give you a short overview of the policy's background and the objectives, so in a way a bird's eye view of where we're coming from. Then I'll elaborate on the key elements, and lastly zoom in on the very specific incentives and how the nitty-gritty details work. And then for everything else, I'd suggest we keep that for the discussion, and I sort of not to bore you with the very specific details that might interest some but not others. So the Skills Development Opportunities Act, or as we call it in German, the Qualifizierungschancengesetz, is connected to a broader set of initiatives in Germany and connected to the development and implementation of the German National Skills Strategy. The law itself entered into force in the beginning of last year and was then in some parts amended by the Work of Tomorrow Act this year. By and large, if you look at active labor market policies in the last 20 years in Germany, I think it's fair to say that it constitutes a major shift towards more prevention and focusing more on employed people rather than mostly focusing on people who are unemployed or want to enter the labor market or are threatened by unemployment. At the same time, it builds on a program that existed before that focused on the training of employed people who were particularly at risk of unemployment. For example, people with low skills or people above 45. And so the law itself now opened and widened the support for continuous training and for continuous learning of all employees and companies who are affected by structural changes. And so it's basically a major shift for the active labor market policies in Germany, I would say. If you look at the target group, to pinpoint that down, it's basically companies and their employees were affected by structural and transformative changes on the labor market. The level of financing depends on the size of the companies, where SMEs and small companies get more, and larger companies who are who have more capabilities and more financial resources get get less funding. The financing itself happens via the regular budget of the public employment services and the overall budget they have to finance continuous education and training, and which also implies that there's larger amounts of funding available than would in a lot of cases be available if you run it as a regular program. In addition to the the basic funding according to the size of the companies, there's bonuses available on the one hand to incentivize social partnership actions and collective action on continuous education and learning, and B, for companies that have particularly high training needs and that are affected particularly strongly by changes in their business models and by the digital transformation and other structural changes. The trainings that can be funded and subsidized need to be certified, which applies to all training measures that can be funded through the public employment services. And in addition to that, the trainings have to be longer than 120 hours. The rationale behind that is that rather small trainings and maybe learning how a new machine works or how a new software program works is something companies can usually do on their own as their core responsibility. But then if we look at larger training measures which go more in the direction of reskilling and upskilling, that is something that is difficult for a lot of companies to finance by themselves, and where there's also an overarching interest from the general public and societal interest, and where the overall economy is benefiting from. The implementation of the training measures at the same time is rather flexible. They can be part-time, they can be full-time, they can be on block, so it just depends on the total of 120 hours. As a little difference in the approach to what Daniel and the Netherlands are doing is that we're focusing less in a way on individual learning accounts and individual upskilling and reskilling opportunities. And that is a debate we're having too, but not the focus of the Skills Development Opportunities Act, but the focus of that is on upskilling and reskilling for employees who will most likely stay with their current employer. And so it's really more focused on the company level, and to support training measures where where it's rather clear that employees have an opportunity to stay with that company, and where you need to realize transitions for reskilling and upskilling in that particular context. But then the transitions to other companies and other sectors are not the focus of it. If you look at the incentive structure in detail, it basically goes along the lines of what I hinted at just before. The financing applies to training costs and the remuneration during the training, and so the wage payments during the training. And both are subsidized, but to different levels, and the level of subsidies decreases with the size of the company. So for micro enterprises, training costs are covered up to 100%, and then the wage payments are subsidized by at least 75%, and then the bonuses I hinted at before are available. It can be an additional 5% to incentivize social partnership agreements on continuous training, and an additional 10% for companies which are hit particularly hard by changes and that have very high training needs. And then if you sort of go along the size of the companies, for companies with fewer than 250 employees, so sort of in what most people would define as SMEs, it's 50% of training costs and 50% of wage payments, and they can be topped up by up to 15% of the bonuses. And then for companies with more than 250 but fewer than 2,500 employees, it's 25 and 25% and up to 40%. And then for the very large companies, it's 15 and 25%, and can be topped up to 15 and 40%. And then one last element, which is in a way a continuation also of the program that existed beforehand, and the fact that the percentage numbers for the remuneration are not shown here anymore should not be the case. So please don't focus on that. But it's more the focus is more on the on the long yellow arrows, where the training costs for employees over 45 years and for severely disabled can be subsidized for up to 100%. And for people without formal vocational qualifications, the remuneration can also be subsidized for up to 100%. And so that still accounts for the fact that those groups are also before sort of the digital transformation became a topic, and structural change and acceleration of that became more of a focus, were at a particularly high risk to become unemployed, and were in particularly high need of reskilling and upskilling. For the moment, that would be everything I'd like to present you now as an input. And then for the rest, I'd be happy to continue the exchange in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. So just perhaps a bit of clarification with you before we go ahead. Is my understanding correct that you are trying to target the people without qualifications here, or with the lowest type of qualifications, who are at risk who are at most risk of losing their jobs with this initiative?
I would say yes and no. And people with low qualifications and particularly high risks were in the focus before already too, and now sort of we widened the focus to people who are employed in general and who are affected by structural changes on the labor market. And so it's a continuation of what we did before, but combined with a substantial widening of the focus, and a shift to employees in times of, and to supporting employees and their companies in times of structural changes.
And this was your intention before the COVID, even
Yeah,
or have you sort of reviewed your objectives in light of what's happening now on the?
So the Qualifications Skills Development Opportunities Act entered into force in the beginning of 2019, and so the legislative process was happening in 2018 before. Before, except for sort of virologists and experts, COVID-19 became a broader topic. And right now, we saw that in a way that a lot of training centers and training measures were put to a halt, also because of in-person trainings were and in some cases still are not possible. And what we did, for example, was to to increase the support and to make it easier to combine short-time work with qualifications. And so, in a way, the current legal framework of the Skills Development Opportunities Act is basically unchanged, and that still stands. But in particular, we made it easier and we increased the incentives to combine short-time work with qualifications.
Yeah. And as you say, this was introduced already in 2019. And of course, at that time, Germany was also looking for skills. I mean, it had in a way a deficit of skilled labor. So that was, of course, I'm sure, a motivation for doing this, and also for using the PES funding, which probably at the time was in less demand by unemployed people because your unemployment levels were at an all-time low. But now that we see so many people losing their jobs again as a consequence of the pandemic, how do you think this will pan out with the budget? Will there be enough funding available to continue with the objectives you have and the numbers you would like to reach with the Act, and covering now all these new unemployed people who will be looking for support and training?
Yeah, by and large, I'm fairly confident and fairly positive about that. But obviously, it remains to be seen. The unemployment insurance had a very large surplus before the crisis hit us. If I'm not mistaken, it was about 26 billion in total, and a lot of that money was spent in particular on short-time work allowance. And currently, the process to balance the budget and to alleviate the budget deficit of the public employment services through federal funding and sort of the federal subsidy are ongoing. And at least for now, luckily the unemployment numbers have not risen that much, but a lot of support was paid out through the short-time work allowance. And for now, we see those numbers declining too. And so, by and large, I'm fairly confident about that. Also, although it's certainly true that the public employment services, also as an organization and logistically, are under a lot of strain to cope with the challenges they're facing, and to make it happen that the short-time work allowances are paid out and handled correctly. But yes, overall, I'm fairly confident about it. And if we look at the projections we have, for now, we don't think that the Corona crisis is changing the overall path we're on. So we're still expecting, in a way, a skilled workers paradox of skill shortages in some sectors and sort of jobs being lost in other sectors, and skills needs changing. And so the overall setup, I think, is from what we know right now and what we're planning with, are still the same.
Okay, and I mean, traditionally, at least, I would say that Germany had a very strong initial vocational training system, but perhaps the emphasis on continuing training was less because you got a very good grounding, and of course it was important to have a qualification. And I see that you underline that 120 hours of of learning are available, and that seems quite substantial. So would the objective be to get people to complete a qualification?
Yeah. So the overall the focus is on rather sort of on longer and more substantial training measures, as of the 120 hours or a sort of an expression and manifestation of that. And on the one hand, that focuses on employees in general who need to reskill and who need to upskill, but the sort of the 100% subsidy for people who don't have a formal vocational qualification is still meant to encourage that in particular, because the risk of becoming unemployed is just, I think, around 5 times higher for people in Germany who don't have a formal qualification compared to people who do. So it's a dual focus, and the sort of the challenges we had before remain, but the fact that reskilling and upskilling becomes a topic for larger amounts of people sort of adds to it.
Mm-hmm. And just perhaps one last thing. I mentioned at the beginning that you were part of the National Skills Strategy Task Force. So could you say a little bit about how the Qualifications Act fits into this overall skills strategy?
So the National Skills Strategy is a project and a process which we started in 2018 together in the lead with the Education Ministry, and then with a number of other partners. I think in total 15 institutions, social partners, different different conferences of ministers from the federal states, the employment ministers, the ministers for education, and the economics ministers, the public employment services, and so by and large a broad coalition of actors in the area of continuous education and training that set out to develop a national skills strategy in a, if you want, in a co-creative and joint process to come up with specific measures everybody can contribute to, in a way, readjust and improve the future readiness of the continuous education and training system in Germany in times of digital and green transitions. And the strategy was presented in the summer of 2019, and we're currently in the process of implementing it and following up on the process. And we'll present sort of a status report on that in the next summer, in June 2021. And the Skills Development Opportunities Act basically fits in with the overall strategy and supports the goal of the strategy.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. And I'm sure our audience will have lots of questions in the second part of our workshop. But now I would like to pass the floor to Daniel, and he will tell us about the individual learning and development budget in the Netherlands. Thank you, Daniel. The floor is yours.
Good morning, all from me here. Thank you for having me here and for giving me the opportunity to tell you something about the Stop the Dutch Individual Learning Budget. I'll be telling you about that scheme, but firstly, I want to take you through the Dutch policy, the Dutch view on lifelong learning, because STUB's a part of a broader aim, and it's good for me to tell you about that, so you can understand the way we intend STUBs to use. I'll start with some remarks on the Dutch view on adult learning, and then I'll tell you everything about there is to know about the individual learning budget. So the Dutch policy aims to create a strong and positive learning culture in which development and learning it becomes in a way a second nature. The Dutch system is pinpointed on the fact that most investments in development and learning come from employers and employees. They have the biggest responsibility and they bear the largest costs. And the policy of the Dutch government is aimed to support that. So to either take away thresholds that employers and employees face, or to invest in certain groups that tend to underinvest in development and learning. In 2018, we started with a multi-annual action plan on lifelong learning with the aim to help and encourage people to become more in charge of their personal working life and career. Because for a learning culture to be set up, you have to get people to develop and to start developing their skills. So shortly, the multi-annual action plan on lifelong learning, it contains several measures. One of them is the individual public learning budget and learning and development budget. It replaces the current tax deduction scheme, and additionally, we're looking to create some tailor-made career advice for special vulnerable groups. We're also encouraging employers to offer privately funded individual learning accounts. Later on, I'll tell you more about why STOP is not an individual learning account. But a lot of employers already offer their employees some form of an individual learning account. And in the light that employers bear the most cost and have the biggest responsibility to invest in development and education of their workers, we want to encourage employers to offer these ILAs more to their employers, and we do that by giving clarity on the fiscal rules for these ILAs. The third pillar is that we want to encourage people to take charge of their career. There are several schemes. We started a pilot with service centers where people can go with all their questions regarding education and development. This year we launched a subsidy scheme especially for SMEs, where they can get subsidy to encourage their workers to invest in development and education. We had a tailor-made career advice for workers that are over 45, and we're stimulating educational institutions to offer more flexible education. And the last pillar of the action plan is that we want to create a personalized and easily accessible overview of reskilling and upskilling opportunities for everyone. So the STOP emerged from the 2017 coalition agreement. Until now, we have a tax deduction system which is very complicated and has very high thresholds, which means that people, mainly lower skilled and older people, don't use it. You have to, the thresholds are that you have to pay for the cost of the education up front. It can take up to 18 months until you get your money back. And when you start your educational activity, it's not clear what your personal contribution will be because it depends on your income. And because these high thresholds and the underinvestment in certain groups, the Dutch government said, okay, we want to replace this tax deduction scheme for an individual budget. And then came STAP. It stands for Stimulering arbeidsmarktpositie, or in English, stimulate labor market position. Its main aim is to contribute to the sustainable employability of people on the labor market. So we want to contribute people taking part in education and thereby working on their labor market position and sustainable employability. It's targeted to every adult that has a bond to the Dutch labor market, so there's no special targeting to vulnerable groups at the moment. The only thing is that people have to be over 18 and may not have reached the pension age. We do, however, have the possibility to target certain part of the budget to vulnerable or disadvantaged groups later on, if we would want to. So when we in 2017, after the coalition agreement, when we started thinking about STAP, by the way, it will enter into force January 1st, 2022. We had the choice to either go for a publicly funded individual learning account or an individual learning budget. We went for the second one, the individual learning budget, because we have a limited budget that for every year for the STAP budget. It's the budget that's available is 218 million euros, and if we would have introduced the individual learning account, that would mean that every individual in the Netherlands would get 30 euros each year in deposited in their account. And because these 30 euros won't help anyone with actually funding any educational activity, we said, okay, we will introduce an individual learning budget, and that's you can apply for that. You can give a bigger amount of subsidy, which people can use to fund more larger educational activities and more expensive educational activities. The subsidy is equal to the costs of the educational activity, with a maximum of 1,000 euros a year. And we're making a register with all the educational activities, and you can think about that would be any kind of form of training until full bachelor degrees. The register will contain of around 20,000 educational activities, both formal and non-formal. We see we're still busy implementing STAP. As I mentioned, a little over a year from now, the time will be there that people can make use of it, and there are a lot of challenges in that. STAP will be executed centrally by the Dutch Employment Insurance Agency, and they have a massive task of creating this new system for to pay subsidies for education and for training, and that system has to be connected to the register with predetermined educational activities as well. So it's a major task, but also and maybe more important, not the practical implementation, but the broad knowledge about the stop budget is one of our great challenges, because the success of an individual learning budget depends on the knowledge, on the public knowledge about the budget. And as it always, it has been a great challenge how you reach certain groups and how you get certain groups to take part in education, and how you get them to invest in their own development. We're investing greatly in a public campaign, and we're giving great attention to the publicity and recognizability of stuff. And in that way, we hope to to get everyone, even the vulnerable groups, to make use of stuff and to invest in their development. Another thing, and that's what we're struggling with, is that the thresholds must be low. We've seen with the current tax deduction scheme that if there are high thresholds, only few people will take part, and we want the people that don't take part of in the tax deduction scheme right now to invest in education and training once stop enters into force. So thresholds must be low, while at the same time you must tackle fraud, and those two combined are a major challenge. We've tried to make the stop process, the application process for the user, as easy as possible. So that means an online application, a form that takes you through every step, and there's no possibility of filling out an incomplete application. And for the user, it's as simple as you choose. You go to your educational institution, you choose which activity you want to enroll in, and once you've enrolled, you apply for the step subsidy. You don't have to do anything else. The subsidy is being paid directly to the educational institution, to, on the one hand, not burden the user with having to pay for their own educational activity, and on the other hand, to counter any form of fraud. As I've mentioned, at this moment there is no the stop budget isn't targeted to any special vulnerable group. We are designing a policy for a tailor-made career advice for these people, in order to let them to show them the importance of investing in education and development, and where they can get advice on what their chances on the labor market are, and which educational activities they can and should invest in. And although the stop budget at this moment isn't targeted to special groups, the specific infrastructure does give us a possibility to, let me say, if we decide that from 2023 we want to target stop solely to older people, we can do that quite easily, and from then on the budget will be targeted to that special vulnerable group. Then I'll tell you something about some last remarks about the advantages of the STUP budget, the individual learning and development budget we see over an ILA, giving our special circumstances. No scheme is perfect, and we know that the individual learning budget isn't as well. But in our specific situation and with the circumstances we are facing, STUP, the individual learning budget, is the best way to go. First thing is that an individual learning budget, it fits best in the Dutch system where the government only supports employers and employees to invest in their education and development. And second is that the individual learning budget, as we set it up, doesn't need any cumbersome execution. It's a quite simple scheme, not only for the user, but also for the employment insurance agency to execute. Less governmental budget needs to be reserved, and that's one of the main reasons we chose for the individual learning budget, because we only have a limited amount of money every year. The budget can easily be directed to benefit specific aims or specific target groups, and we can do that quite quickly. Within a month, we can decide whether we want to target the STUP budget to certain groups, and we can arrange that. Then there is a possibility of co-financing, and that also is very important for the Dutch system, that an employee that wants to make use of the STUP budget can also invest money that they get from their employer to pay for more substantial educational activities. And the last advantage we see is that although STUP has we have a limited budget available every year, we think that is also an incentive for people to actually make use of it. We think scarcity will make sure that people will easier take part in education and make use of the individual learning budget. So yeah, that's it for me at the moment, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, I hear lots of the buzzwords and lots of the discussion that we're having, of course, inside the Commission at the moment about individual learning accounts. But one thing I would like to ask you about is this idea that it's €1,000 a year. And just to put this in perspective, I mean, how much would an average training cost? Because I'm thinking about this because you mentioned that, you know, even people who want to go to third level education can avail of this. But I mean, it seems to me that would be a drop in the ocean in relation to the fees or the budget they might need to do that. And one of the things about the individual learning account is that you can build up some money in your account. And then, of course, if it's on a year-to-year basis, how do you assure that you have a continuation next year? Just a few thoughts that I would like to hear your answers to, please.
Yeah, a lot of good questions. Let me start with the budget. It's €1,000 a year is it's not enough to fund the more substantial like full bachelor's programs or full. We know that. We chose for €1,000 because we've seen that with the current tax deduction scheme, €1,000 was the average budget that was being deducted every year. So that's why we thought to put it there on that number. And as I mentioned, we want to encourage the co-financing. So we want to encourage employers to pay for the last part of the educational activity if that's needed. But also we see that smaller trainings and smaller less substantial forms of educational activities can be paid for with €1,000. Then to talk about the question. I lost it. You asked the second question, but I lost it, Martina. I'm sorry.
I've lost it as well, I'm afraid. But there's another aspect. Yes, about how they could build. Well, I think you've explained that you're trying to get the employers to continue on, but nevertheless, I mean, if somebody hadn't got their employers backing, how would they assure that next year, or is it possible to assure that they could continue to avail for a couple of years until their training was done?
Yeah, we're working out right now to give people a right to ensure them that once they start with, for example, a multi-annual educational activity, a multi-annual training, that they can get the right to have to apply for STAP every year and get the €1,000 every year before other people apply. So we're working out that they they have an advantage in a way in order for them to be able to pay for the education every year.
Yeah, and then I have another question about numbers, because I think you mentioned that this budget could mention that this budget 300,000 people a year. And I mean, I don't know what percentage of the working population that would be, but I know that already in the Netherlands, you have quite a high participation rate. In the labor force survey, it's 19% in the month prior to the survey. And I don't think this budget, could cover anything like that. So I'm just wondering then, how do you prevent, these people who are already training and finding the finance either from their employers or from somebody, how do you avoid, that these people who know how to find resources and so on, that they will come first and take the funding, and then you won't increase your numbers or you won't target new populations?
Yeah, that's one of the main challenges we're facing right now. In the beginning, I don't know whether we can guarantee that we won't target, or we won't target the people that already know how to find their way to finance their education. But as I mentioned, we want to put stuff into place. We want to make it work, and then we want to see whether you want to you need to target the budget to specific groups. So yeah, to shortly answer your question, in the beginning we'll target it to everyone. We can't make sure that that people already know how to find their way financing their education, that they won't make use of it. And if that happens, then we have the possibility to to make sure to change the scheme and target it to, for example, lower skilled workers, for example, older workers, other groups that tend to underinvest and that we see at that moment still don't make use of the financing scheme.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And at this stage, I would like to remind you of the poll question. What essential elements does the system need to support reskilling and upskilling? This is open. You can use the Slido on the right side of your screen. And for those of you who do not have that option, you can also use the Slido app, and the event code you need for that is hashtag K554. So hash K554. And I see that we have some reactions already to this. And people are saying that as well as funding, and people need other incentives to participate in training offers, and outreach has to go along with funding, and motivation. That seems to be a problem that is confronted widely, and the flexibility, of course, the short units, and somebody suggesting MOOCs as a possible way of providing this flexibility, and money motivation for the employee, but also from the employer. And then, of course, guidance. And Daniel, you have touched on that. They say that good information about the options is essential, and a good strategy. And Michael has been developing that. And related to motivation is, of course, the willingness of the employee to undertake training. And there's a question here. Sorry, Yes, so if we move on to the questions then. There's a question coming in about the company's role, and is it up to the company to decide which training is offered? So I think that would perhaps, both of you could perhaps react to that. You probably have two different approaches, but Michael?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. If you look at the Skills Development Opportunities Act and sort of that kind of instrument, the focus is more definitely on training measures where the company has a need and that also suits the employee. So it's a mixture of both, and you have to find an agreement, but certainly more aligned with company needs and current employer needs, and less focused on sort of the interest that you primarily as an individual might be having, or that might be relevant for future jobs that your current employer doesn't sort of doesn't agree on or doesn't see as much.
Yeah, because we often hear, that companies say they can supply their own technical skills, but what they need is soft skills and key competences. Is that something that you see at all?
I think it's if you look at the skills companies need right now and companies need in the near future, they can sort of do that very well on their own. Similarly to the Netherlands, the major chunk of investment in continuous education and training is paid for privately and is paid for by employers, by companies. At the same time, if you look sort of a little more in the midterm, there's a lot of uncertainty about what exact skills needs might be there, and so you're going more in the direction of you need good labor market information and intelligence. And at the same time, if you look at the duration of trainings, what we know from the statistics in Germany is that the majority of trainings has a rather short durations of a day or maybe 2 days, and that, so on the one hand it makes it easier to integrate it in the daily work routine. You might sort of add different trainings on top of one another, but then at the same time that is less focus on sort of longer and larger training measures that might become more relevant in the context of reskilling and upskilling, and sort of that's where we're targeting at with our policy.
And Daniel, what's the situation in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think it's the main responsibility to see what kind of training, what kind of skills the employers have to develop is up to the employer. It's his responsibility to make sure that his employees are skilled to do their jobs. But we see that the small and medium enterprises, and in particular the small enterprises, that they have more trouble with depending which skills their workers need to develop, and which changes on the labor market are affecting their businesses, and how that should affect their employees. So to support the SMEs in this, we have made a subsidy scheme to advise them on what the changes are for the upcoming future years of their businesses, and what that means for their working force. But primarily, the responsibility to keep the employees skilled is a responsibility of the employer.
And how does that work then if you give the budget, the autonomy for the budget to the individual? So what's the connection then between the employer and the employee in that case?
There doesn't need to be a explicit connection. As I've mentioned, we are working on a strong and positive learning culture, and the way to reach that is to get people to take part in education, in training, and to invest in their development. We say mainly that is a responsibility of employees and employers, and primarily, we want to that employers pay for the education. But we also see that, for example, when someone wants to switch jobs, when someone wants to switch jobs between sectors, and they have to pay for educational activities, then it'll be harder for them to get their current employer pay for the education. So that's what you can see the individual learning budget. It's not primarily for to up and reskill employees in their current business, in their current positions, but to get them to invest in training and education in a more broadened sense.
I see. So that seems to be a big sort of one of the big differences then between the two approaches, that in Germany it's to keep the company, the skills supplied to the individual company, and in the Netherlands it's also looking towards the individual's possible need to move to a different company. And Michael, I have a few questions here for you. Why did Germany decide to focus on enterprises and not, as in the Netherlands, on the individual? And then perhaps related to that, the incentive is more or less in place now for 2 years. So how does take-up differ between companies of different sizes? Are there higher subsidies, higher success rates in the small companies, or do the bigger ones still seem to get the most of the cake?
So maybe regarding the first question, the current focus is more on the company level, and sort of I guess to a certain degree it fits. It's more of a continuation of the development of the policy framework had in place before. But at the same time, sort of we sort of also inspired and related to the initiative on individual learning accounts, and sort of the whole discourse in that regard. Yeah, we are thinking about the individual dimension. There's also other instruments in place. For example, in the responsibility of the education ministry, there's a funding scheme for people with a vocational education to sort of get support for sort of, I'm not sure about the English terms, but sort of to get the next higher degree in the vocational training system. And there's other subsidy schemes for people with lower income levels, which sort of go in a similar direction of the Dutch approach to incentivize sort of that people start learning and get curious in a way. And so it's a very diverse and I guess if you look at the individual perspective, not always easy to navigate landscape on sort of rather targeted incentive schemes and policy measures we have in place. And so for that act, it was in a way a natural continuation of the policy setup we had before, but we're also having a discussion on strengthening the individual dimension. And then if you look back at the first 2 years of the Skills Development Opportunities Act, I guess to a certain degree, it's not that easy to reach a preliminary conclusion on that, also because of the COVID-19 crisis and the impact that had on training measures. But there is a reporting scheme in place, and I think the first report on that is currently being prepared and will be submitted to Parliament in in the next weeks or month. Very roughly speaking, if you look at different sectors or the training measures, there has been, if I'm not mistaken, a focus on the care sector and on the logistics sector. But then at the same time, if you look in a way at growth rates, we see that the IT qualifications are in demand too, and it's sort of the absolute level is still rather low, but that is increasing most rapidly. And by and large, I think we see that the scheme works, but we have a similar challenge as Daniel said before for the Netherlands, that you need to be able, you need to communicate it, and you need to make sure that companies and employees know about it, and so if that definitely remains a challenge for us too. And I guess it always remains a challenge.
Yeah, you mentioned a few sectors there, but could you just briefly describe a bit what types of training are requested?
So it goes a lot, for example, in the direction of in the care sector, for training for people who take care of elderly people, for example. But it's I would say it's diverse, and sort of the statistics we have right now, sort of the categories are a little broader, so you can't pinpoint it exactly. And I hope that sort of we'll have more information on that once the first report on that will be released sometime soon.
Okay, and I guess there'll be some statistics in that report as well, because one viewer was asking if there were any statistics available. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Daniel, you talked, of course, in introducing the learning budgets, that one of your preoccupations was with tackling fraud, and one listener is also wondering about quality assurance as well in the training that people get for their money. But they also see some problems with direct payments to educational institutions, because they may hunt participants without giving them good quality, or there may be fake participants. So what checks are in place to avoid, or what checks will be in place to avoid this sort of occurrence?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question. Of course, paying the subsidy directly to the educational institution does give problems. However, we only want no, we don't want, we only let educational institutions and educational activities into the register when they have a certain quality branch. We have a couple. And only if they have one of those, so it's only when they have a brand from a higher institution, which guarantees the quality of the educations that they give. Only then can they get into the register. And we look at it very sharply. We, as soon as we see that a educational institution makes misuse of this the individual learning budget, they won't only be thrown out of the register, but will also make formal notice to the institution that gave them their quality brand. So, and they might be able to lose that as well. In order to make sure that they can't use fake participants, we ask for the participants to log in with their digital ID, and they have to apply for the educational activity. And afterwards, the educational institution has to give an official report of the progress and whether the participant finished took part in the activity and finished it as well. And we'll check that as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think you also mentioned a register of the training offer.
Yeah.
So would that then be based on your analysis of the future needs of the labor market, or is it a broader database with transversal skills? What's its nature?
It's a broader database which contains of, as I've mentioned, a lot of different kinds of training and educational activities. So you can there will be some trainings and educations that the branches and sectors want, but also the regular educational activities, like the regular bachelor's or master's degrees, and other smaller kinds of trainings for soft skills or that kind of trainings.
So these training courses would also be quality assured as well as their providers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and every training and every provider has to be quality assured. Yeah.
Okay. And in your system, Michael, because I know you were working yourself on the future needs of work and the labor market. So, you know, is the work 4.0 reflected in the type of offer that you're promoting, or how do you sort of fit in the skills intelligence and perhaps how would you pass that information on to small and medium enterprises?
I think it's sort of the question in a way is twofold. For the general training offers, it's, I guess, in the first place, it's in a way market driven. What is developed and what is offered. Those trainings that are applicable for funding through the public employment services need to be certified too, and so the providers need to have a certification of their quality. And then sort of also in the context of our process on the future of work that you mentioned, we have different measures in place. So if we have a sort of prognostics was maybe too much, but sort of a scenario analysis and quantitative analysis of how we expect the labor market to develop, in particular with regard to the digital transformation and sort of shifting jobs and skills needs. And sort of that is a tool that we use to develop policy ourselves and as guidance for our activities. On top of that, we're experimenting with approaches such as evaluating online job offers and sort of learning more about current skills needs, and sort of not real time is too much, and I think that sort of won't happen that soon, but to be closer to what is happening on the labor market. And the first results we got from that were encouraging I think so. That is something we might explore further, and the question of how you improve the transmission of the intelligence, the skills intelligence we have towards training providers and towards particularly smaller enterprises is a question we're actually dealing with in the implementation process of the skills strategy, because I think it's a tricky question, and there's sort of no easy answers to it. But I think the potential benefits of improving that transmission channel are fairly sizable.
And of course, we have a question here about social partner involvement, especially in the STAP, Daniel. You know, have they got a role in well, had they a role in designing it? Will they have a role in its future rollout?
Yeah, they have. They had a role in designing it. We talked with them to see where the needs are, and they also have a big role in providing the training and educational activities that branches and sectors need to be in the register. They social partners branches often have their own quality insurance, their own brand, and they are connected to us in order to make sure that those activities, those educational activities that they need, that they want to invest in. For example, for people who want to switch branches, that those activities are in the register. So they are very closely involved in the whole process. And also when it does enter into force, social partners in the form of employers also have a big role when it comes to co-financing educational activities for their employees. Sorry.
Okay, and then just very briefly, of course, people are interested in the training of the trainers and how good that they are prepared to provide the training. I'd just like a quick reaction from both of you.
I'd say.
Oh, yes, Daniel.
Sorry, I'd say also these kinds of training and will be part of the register. So people who want to train themselves becoming a trainer can also make use of the STAP budget.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, would you like to say something about that?
I think that is sort of an ongoing question, and a sort of is something that you sort of need to keep on the radar, particularly if you look at changing skills needs for the labor market. You obviously shouldn't forget the need to train the trainers. But that is particularly true if you, I guess, if you look more at sort of in a way more high tech skills and more complex skills that are beyond what is offered in traditional training courses. And yeah, I think that is a field we're definitely looking at.
Yes, and I guess now the digital skills in particular of all the trainers will be a big issue from now on, because I think we're never going to go back to the old situation where it was all face-to-face learning. So there'll be an element of blended learning and online learning in all of these offers that of upskilling and reskilling that we finance in the future. But thank you both. I think it was very interesting to see the two different approaches and points of view, and to see that there are also some common, of course. We're all working for the same goal to maximize the number of people that can avail of a continuing training and upskilling. So, and I think that's also reflected in some of the answers here to the poll, that the points you were covering are important. Of course, the funding and incentives, and the outreach and motivation and guidance, of course, which we only touched the surface of, and perhaps cooperation between all the stakeholders. That's a big issue in itself. And extending it to all individuals, of course, that's a big challenge going forward. And of course, funding the training of trainers themselves and building their capacities, and using technologies such as MOOCs, and of course, the increasing supplying the increasing demand for short units and accelerated courses. And yes, I guess the two keywords jumping out are money and motivation. But also fitting the company's needs. And I think it's now time to pass on to the final stage of our workshop. And I'm delighted to welcome Gina Ebner, who's the Secretary General of the European Association for the Education of Adults. And Gina will sum up and give her impressions of our discussion today. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Martina, and thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to do that. Sorry, I obviously spoke over the transition music, but let me get ahead and I apologize. I'm not going to do a traditional summary, as in first we heard and then, but I'm going to pick some issues that really jumped at me during the discussion and which I think are crucial for the development of up and reskilling that is going on in Europe at the moment. Now, I think we all agree on the huge challenge that Martina presented earlier. And in a way, it becomes clearer that any change in our societies, whether it's a crisis like we have now with Corona, or whether it is the development of new opportunities, really always has an impact on the skills needs that are there and that we need to answer. I really liked the approach that was underlined about prevention. And I think it's true, as Michael has said, a few years ago, the concept of prevention in active labor market policy just didn't exist. And that shift that we look at, either companies, but also on individual skills, and rather plan interventions at an earlier stage is really, really important. This is, of course, linked to what was also said by Daniel, and that is looking at the future skills needs. I know it was mentioned by quite a few other people. So to have that opportunity, and I think most of you know that at the European level, CEDEFOP is trying to do skills forecasts and so on. But I think it's really important to raise the awareness of what will be needed, what will be less needed. You know, do we stay in certain sectors, or do we really prepare people to move to another sector, sort of the reskilling part of the up and reskilling? So I think that is one of the key points that has been made. I also wanted to highlight the social partnership, which was just raised a few minutes ago, and the importance of including social partners and working with social partners because they do have the reach in the companies with the employers and employees. So for me, this is a key development. Also, maybe because my background is Austrian, and we do have that very well implemented, and we do see the advantage of that. The other point that came up, I think Michael mentioned that, but I'm sure if we talk to Daniel or the participants, is the issue of partnerships. You were talking about the skill strategy, and that in order to implement it, you're working with a lot of partners. And I think it's in the upskilling strategy, and we notice that in whatever we do also in the European Association, partnerships among providers with civil society, with social partners, with governments, local authorities, public authorities, social services in some cases, and so on. This is becoming more and more important, because we realize that, just one area or one sector cannot achieve what is achievable without partnerships, without support to and from other organizations. I already mentioned awareness in the context of future skills, but this is, of course, a larger topic. Awareness raising for the possibilities, awareness raising for the funding, for the future skills, but also awareness raising for the individual about the learning opportunities. One of the participants mentioned, at least one of the participants mentioned outreach. And I think these are two topics that really go very closely together. And I think everyone underlined that it can be really difficult to reach the target groups that you really, really want to reach. So this remains one of the key challenges for everyone involved, actually. I mean, we know how difficult it can be to raise awareness for the individual, but also other organizations. So we really need to invest in that as well. What also came out for me is to be appropriate, or to find the appropriate awareness raising, but also offers for the particular target group. I really like the Daniel mentioned the awareness raising. Michael mentioned the particular almost tailor-made approach to the funding, more money to smaller companies, and then decreasing and so on, which I think is quite an interesting approach to a fairer system. And it's absolutely true that smaller organizations need more help than a big company. So to really look at what is needed for the target group. Do you need more advice? Do you need more guidance? Do you already know what's happening? So there is, I think it has been highlighted how important that tailor-made, or almost tailor-made approaches, and together with flexibility, a certain flexibility that is necessary in order to accommodate the needs of the learner, the needs of the company, but also the needs of the funders. I wanted to highlight two more smaller points and then wrap up. I think, yes, certification was a key issue, and it's obvious from the presentations that certification gives assurance to the funder that the money is actually being used in an appropriate manner. But I also wanted to highlight that certification can really help also the individual, the learner, because if you're a potential learner, you very rarely have really a good insight of what exactly quality issues are. You probably have a general understanding of what a good course is or what a good offer is, but nevertheless, you also need to rely on something in the background that makes sure that there is a quality offer on hand. So I just wanted to raise the learner approach. Now, let me quickly wrap up. I think Bettina already was ready to jump. I think what was highlighted very clearly is the tension that we sometimes have between individual funding and company funding. And I think you have both shown that there are some weaknesses in every system. You cannot do 100% or reach 100% of that. But you also highlighted the advantages of the various systems. So I think there is a certain a certain skepticism, and I was very thankful to Daniel to underline, for example, that sometimes financial incentives can have an impact that you don't really want. The tax deduction was a good example where you actually then end up giving money to people who don't necessarily need it. So I think that continued monitoring who you are reaching with the funds that you have is quite important. But on the other hand is really also the search and the monitoring of what really works and then trying to implement it. And I have seen that in both your systems. So thank you very much. And I think it also, the whole session gave us a good idea how funding can have an impact on the learning and the qualifications and what to be careful about. So thank you very much. It has really inspired me to think further about these issues.
I need my micro. So thank you very much, Gina. That was a very succinct and complete summary, I would say. And of course, this is not the last that we're going to hear of this issue, upskilling and reskilling. And of course, in the Commission's work program for 2021, we will be fully engaged in a public consultation on funding mechanisms and the possibility of individual learning accounts. And of course, by the end of the month, the German presidency will have negotiated the recommendation on vocational education and training and modernizing and reforming systems in the Council. And that, of course, has a strong element of continuing vocational training. And needless to say, this discussion will feed into all of that. And I would like then to thank the speakers, Michael and Daniel and Gina, for summing up. And of course, I would like to thank the participants, and particularly those who have joined us today on their holiday, because I think in many countries, the 11th of the 11th is a holiday. And of course, I would like to thank my colleague Sophie, who's been connecting me with the Slido. And to all the colleagues in the back office, Isabel, Morgan, and Pierre, who have kept the show on the road all morning. Thank you all for your support and for your technical know-how. And it was a pleasure to run this session. And I hope you will log in to some of the other Vocational Skills Week events before the end of the week. Thank you very much, and bye-bye, everyone.